This is the story of a man who was very good at selling things that didn't exist. Manfred Schmieder was at the center of the biggest financial fraud case in post-war German history. He served 6 years in prison for his crimes. At the height of his power, Big Money had his own jet, his own airfield, and several luxury homes. Politicians gathered around him. Banks lent him huge amounts of money. Nothing was too good for him. We wanted to find out how he managed to scam billions in a complex pyramid scheme. Today, Manfred Schmieder lives on Mallorca, where he retired after he got out of prison. Schmieder wants to keep his family out of this report. His ex-wife and 2 children live in Switzerland. Schmieder grew up in Karlsruhe, where his father was a businessman. He discovered at an early age that he had a talent for making money. We met him at one of his favorite restaurants near Palma.
Of course, I was always ambitious. I wanted to have a job. When I was in college, I sold cars, first VWs and then Mercedes. Before that, when I was 16, I sold life insurance after school. I worked for a company that was owned by the father of one of my friends. I always wanted to have something to do, but at some point, I took a wrong turn. And I either didn't notice at the time, or I realized it too late.
Prosecutors say that Schmieder's company, Flotex, cheated banks and leasing companies out of more than 4 billion marks. Reinhard Hoffmann was one of the prosecutors in Schmieder's case. Documents used as evidence at his trial are stored in this basement room at the prosecutor's office in Mannheim. Hoffmann carried out extensive interviews with Schmieder. We asked him what drove Schmieder to commit these crimes.
At first, he didn't have a lot of friends at school. But at the age of 16, in the mid-1960s, he got a moped. None of the other kids had one, and he used that moped to make friends. He wanted to be popular, and I think that was a basic component of his character. He constantly sought the approval of others.
Manfred Schmieder founded Flotex in 1994 and became enormously successful over the next several years.
He could be pretty intimidating. He was always very well dressed, with tailor-made suits and a Rolex on his wrist. Very impressive.
He takes everything he does to extremes. When he goes after something, he chases it like a terrier until he gets it.
The boy who started out with a moped had made it to the top and now owned a fleet of luxury cars. In 1999, Schmieder celebrated his 50th birthday with a gala event at his estate at Turmberg on the outskirts of Karlsruhe.
We invited about 300 people, politicians, business executives, sports stars, anybody who was anybody.
People were dying to get an invitation. It was the event of the year in the state of Baden-Württemberg.
Schmieder lived a life of luxury, a private jet with gold faucets. Villas all over the world, in Ibiza, Florida, Uruguay and Samoritz. He owned 3 yachts. The largest was 55 meters long. Schmieder bought it from the Sultan of Brunei.
His extravagance was excessive. On the one hand, that sort of lifestyle makes some people envious. On the other hand, envy is the highest form of recognition. And Schmieder used his position to win approval from people.
He had all the toys that anyone could want. A huge collection of beautiful cars, yachts, jet aircraft. He even had his own airport. Who else has that?
We took Manfred Schmieder to visit the airfield that he used to own. It's now the Karlsruhe Baden-Baden International Airport. For this report, Schmieder agreed to visit some of the places that played an important role in his life as he made his way to the top. He used to come here often. At one time, he had 2 private planes and a helicopter parked here. He built his business empire on a technology concept that he discovered in the late 1980s. A US company called Flowmole developed a horizontal drilling system so that utility lines could be laid without causing a lot of environmental damage. Manfred Schmieder adapted this idea and convinced banks and leasing companies to invest in it.
We were convinced that this was a great system, and the banks thought so as well. They gave us $20 million to develop the equipment we needed.
Schmieder promoted his concept with expensive adverts that were broadcast on prime-time German TV.
Laying a gas line?
We're doing it underground.
Underground without digging?
It's a new system.
But the commercials were deceptive. In fact, the drilling machines didn't work at all. Rocks and existing lines got in the way. So Schmieder's business never really got off the ground. But he managed to convince investors that his company was turning a profit.
We actually started out piecemeal. It's not like my partner and I actually planned to rip people off. We believed in this concept. We wanted it to be a success, so we manufactured statistics that appeared to make it a success. We were counting on future sales, and that's how we came up with this system. And the banks were delighted to help finance this project.
At the height of the scandal, Schmieder had convinced investors that his company had more than 3,000 drilling machines, but in reality, there were just under 300. The key factor in keeping the scheme going was Schmieder's skill as a salesman.
He can be very charming. If you've known him a long time, like I have, you're less impressed by it. But most people were taken in by his charm, to put it bluntly.
Schmieder hasn't flown over his former company headquarters in nearly 2 decades. Today, we're taking the same route that he did back then.
We're right over it.
It would have been a short trip by car, but Schmieder preferred to take the chopper.
It's faster, and no traffic jams either.
He often took investors along. The helicopter was on call 24 hours a day.
We're right over it.
Where would you land?
Right there where those containers are.
Schmieder worked in a luxuriously appointed office. He'd come a long way from selling used cars for a living. This is where he built the business empire that turned out to be little more than a house of cards. And it came crashing down on February 4th, 2000. Police arrested Manfred Schmieder at his office. For most of his employees, this development came as a complete surprise. It was on a Friday afternoon when most of the workers were getting ready to go home.
It was the police and some tax investigators. I could hardly believe it. I was shocked. And then I thought, that's that. They wouldn't be here if they didn't have a good reason.
Police and officials from the prosecutor's office carried out boxes full of evidence. This was shaping up to be the biggest case of financial fraud in post-war German history. 2 decades later, this is all that remains of the Flotex sign on top of this building. The company that had been the darling of bankers and politicians went out of business in late 1999. This is the first time that Schmieder has been back here since Flotex collapsed.
It's a very strange feeling to be here after 18 years and 2 weeks. I could still see the place in my mind, but now that I'm actually here, it's difficult for me to look back at everything that happened. That was the hardest day of my life.
He hasn't been back here since the day he was arrested.
This was Mrs. Laab's office, my secretary.
It's almost hard to believe that this is the place where Schmieder made all of his deals.
This is really difficult.
Where was your desk?
Over here, right there. I feel like I'm in a movie right now. I'm glad that I came back here, though, so that I can somehow close this chapter of my life. But it's not easy. I'd like to leave now.
The Flotex system worked for 5 years. Schmieder kept selling machines, even though most of them existed only on paper. He created an elaborate business facade to fool his investors.
We took a creative approach. When the bank auditors wanted to see some drilling machines, we'd switch the identification plates and show them as much equipment as they wanted.
They kept some of the machines in this warehouse. Officials from the banks and leasing companies had a look around and were satisfied.
They came in, wrote down the ID numbers, and checked them against the list they had at the office, and they all matched. They also looked at the ID plates, and they checked out as well. That's basically how we did it.
Everything seemed fine. At the end of the day, he was probably pleased to see how easy it was to deceive people.
It all seemed so easy, almost a sure thing. Schmieder kept playing his shell game with the drilling equipment, and the banks kept lending him money. After all, he had to make the monthly lease payments, even if the machines existed only on paper.
It was a classic pyramid scheme, and it worked at first, because he used the new loans to pay off old creditors. But then things got out of hand, and it became more and more difficult to control it. It got to the point where he had to come up with 60 million marks a month just to make the leasing payments.
But Schmieder managed to convince the banks to keep giving him money.
The banks made big profits with these Flotex deals. Bank branches were competing with each other to get his business. The scheme would never have worked if the banks hadn't played along. Absolutely not. There's no way.
Schmieder deliberately kept his meetings with bank executives short. He preferred to spend his time flying them around in his helicopter and treating them to sumptuous meals.
They'd fly out to the airfield near Söllingen and then celebrate with a big lunch. Schmieder called them liquid lunches. That means that everyone drank a lot of alcohol. Maybe he was trying to get his guests to be a little less cautious.
Sometimes they'd fly to the nearby Alsace region to sample the excellent local wines, or he'd invite bankers and business partners to his yacht or one of his villas.
I created situations where I could demonstrate my success to the outside world. That was very important for me. I'd invite people out to the yacht or take them to dinner. And these displays of success became part of the business model. I had to do it to keep the scheme going.
In 1996, Schmieder bought himself an airfield, a former Canadian military facility near Baden-Baden. A powerful state politician helped him to arrange the deal, the honorary chairman of the Baden-Württemberg Free Democratic Party, Jürgen Morlock.
Morlock recommended that the German government should sell the airfield, and at a reasonable price too, about 38 million marks. He also arranged for us to get a government subsidy, provided that we got final approval and started flight operations. That was a great deal for us, so we went ahead with it.
Schmieder deliberately made a point of courting politicians who could help him grow his business, people who could open doors for him. They included Jürgen Morlock, a respected politician who knew everyone. Through Morlock, he met a lot of important people, so it was a smart move for him to make.
Schmieder also started building a new Flotex headquarters complex at the airfield. Leading politicians attended the groundbreaking ceremony, including the state premier at the time, Erwin Teufel. The guests were impressed with his model of the proposed new facility. Schmieder made a promotional video.
From here, we'll tackle the projects of the third millennium.
Schmieder claimed that this new facility would bring prosperity to the region. State Premier Teufel took the controls of an excavator at a ceremony to mark the start of construction. But for this report, none of the politicians who worked with Schmieder wanted to talk to us about him. After all, it's a very old story.
Schmieder enjoyed being around politicians, and they enjoyed being around him. It was like they acknowledged each other's importance.
Frieda Birzeler is a former Baden-Württemberg interior minister who later chaired a state parliament committee that investigated the Flotex scandal. At this point, questions were already being raised about the company's finances. But prosecutors and the tax authorities did not investigate, perhaps because of all the powerful politicians who were linked to Schmieder.
He knew a lot of people in the state government, including the premier, so he must be an important guy. If he wasn't, they'd have had nothing to do with him. That influenced the decisions made by the authorities. It's not like they said, "I'm not going anywhere near that case," but they did see that they had to be careful because of Schmieder's status.
Und da weiß man, oh, prominent, da muss ich vorsichtig sein.
In July 1999, Schmieder threw a huge party to celebrate his 50th birthday. Here's a picture of the official invitation and the guest list. 300 people were invited. It was an event that no one wanted to miss. Among the guests was former Baden-Württemberg State Premier Lothar Späth, who gave the opening speech. The festivities took place at Schmieder's Turmberg estate. He and his family lived there until his arrest in February 2000.
My biggest mistake was that I used my financial resources to create an image of success, not only for the outside world, but also for me personally. I wanted people to envy me. And when people are jealous of you, and you crash and burn, they all cheer.
We are on our way to Manfred Schmieder's former estate at Turmberg near Karlsruhe. The property covers 60,000 square meters. Back then, he believed that he deserved to live in a place like this.
When I look back at those times, I can't believe that I didn't realize how serious things had become. The whole thing kept getting bigger and bigger, and I just went along with it.
Schmieder says that he was caught up in a spiral of events that he could not escape.
You only have one goal, and you'll do whatever it takes to achieve it. You lose your sense of right and wrong, and you do some things that are wrong, not merely questionable. You do things that are illegal, but you don't care anymore.
Behind these walls, Manfred Schmieder entertained his guests and impressed them with his wealth. But many of his friends from back then are long gone.
They came to my parties and had a lot of fun. But when the whole thing collapsed, they disappeared.
When he lost everything, including the yachts, those people didn't want to have anything to do with him. I wouldn't call them friends.
When you're rich and powerful, people like to be around you. But if you get into trouble, no one wants to know you.
Drop down a little. That would be great.
It's hard to believe that Manfred Schmieder managed to get away with this scheme for so long. But the bigger it got, the more people believed him.
It was all based on power and influence and money. It was like he was too big to fail. Maybe some people thought he was, but no one seemed to doubt that the company was profitable.
He said to himself, I have to show my family in the state of Baden-Württemberg that I can be successful. And that's just what he tried to do.
For a time, Manfred Schmieder was able to convince people that he was a model entrepreneur. He attracted politicians who thought that he could be useful to them, and bankers who thought that he'd make them a lot of money. Today, he regrets what he did.
The primary victims were the banks, not any private individuals, just the banks. But I do have a guilty conscience. What we did was wrong. I flew quite high and then crashed. It's all my fault. I can't blame anyone else. But most of all, I'm sorry about how this affected my family, because I've made them feel miserable.